Hello everyone, welcome back. It's Health Economics. So today we are going to focus on one of the big issues in health economics study, which related to the health insurance market, which is adverse selections. So in the previous chapter, chapter 7, we kind of take a look at the demand of insurance. Well, why we buy insurance? It's basically coming from the fact that we are trying to reduce or eliminate uncertainty in life to gain utility with the given resources we have. Assuming we have the health incomes and the sick income, well, now the health insurance is going to providing some of the certain income in our life if the insurance is going to be a full insurance, so that we can be covered or maybe to eliminate those risks that we face for losing those income in our life. In chapter 10, well, we are going to talk about the problem of adverse selections. Well, we are skipping two chapters that actually talk about some theories and also theoretical models that derive the adverse selection problem. But we are going to skip that. Instead, we are going to jump into this chapter to talk about some evidence we found. So in the PowerPoint, you have already studied the chapters that giving you some of the examples that illustrates the problem of adverse selections. So here we are going to talk about the difference between adverse selections and moral hazards, which is what we're going to learn in the next chapter, and mainly use one of our examples to illustrate the problems of the two. So first of all, the adverse selection actually is a behavior created by the asymmetrical information market. Well, in the insurance market, obviously, not every seller of insurance know about their consumers. And of course, it's not violating to assume the consumer sometime might actually hide some of those information that the insurer doesn't know. So the adverse selection actually coming from the fact that in the insurance market, the consumers or the customers, they are taking advantage of this asymmetrical information. So they're trying to hide something from the insurer so that they can pay a lower premiums according to the risks. One example to illustrate, maybe when there is a cancer patient who are trying to find this insurance coverage that hoping to actually given some amount of money upfront, they can be, or this person will be covered for whatever treatments that he has to get in order to treat cancer. So this patient might actually walk into one of the office and talk about, well, I'm actually a healthy person, so I just want to buy a health insurance package that cover, of course, the treatment for cancer specifically. Well, when the insurance company don't have any kind of methods or any kind of way to figure out the risks that they involve with this individual customer, obviously they will basically just ask this customer, oh, okay, well, you're buying this insurance for cancer treatments. Well, do you have cancer? Well, obviously, given the fact that, well, this person can lie to the insurer and the insurer will have no way to prove it, then the persons who got cancer obviously will always lie to this insurance company to get those coverage so that later he can get treatment from the coverage with just a very small amount of premium payments. So this is one way how the adverse selections work in the market. It's a big problem because, well, obviously you can imagine it's not only one person will do that, but every single one in the market is doing this. Obviously, they are trying to hide as much as possible of the information in order to take advantage of the insurer. Well, on the other hand, the moral hazards, sometimes people confuse with the adverse selections. The moral hazard actually describe the customer risk behavior change after they are purchasing the insurance coverage. So in the case of this example here, maybe when this one individual going into an auto insurance company, he purchased this insurance for his new car. Well, before he bought this new car with the insurance, obviously he will be very, very careful driving on the roads to this company But once they walk out, or once this customer actually walked out from the insurance company and knowing that his car is now covered by whatever happens to on the roads, well, obviously this person will be a little bit more riskier driving on the road. Or I would say, well, not like saying that he's going to be a very risky driver, but then, well, comparing to the case where before he actually get to the auto insurance company without any insurance, well, now, because he knows that he's covered on the roads, he will be less careful on the roads. So that behavior change actually described by the moral hazard problem. Well, you can actually imagine in the healthcare markets, obviously it happens a lot because there might be some people who buying, let's say, a health insurance for diabetes or obesity. Now that they know, well, if I am getting obese or maybe getting the problem of diabetes, obviously, well, all the medical bills will be covered by the insurance company. So I will be feeling a little bit more grateful to eat more of the high caloric foods, very tasty, oily, greasy foods in order to make myself happy when I'm eating it, because I don't have to worry about the consequences that come after. So moral hazards also happen, and it creates a lot of problems in the insurance market, which we are going to talk about in the next chapter. But the problems that we truly face as an economist is that, well, both effects actually apply to the same results. So that means people who are relatively more risky and not letting the insurer know about his risk level, obviously they will take advantage so that the insurer will lose some money because they have to pay more. And in the case of moral hazard, again, well, the insurance company might actually base on the current state of risk level of the individuals in order to charge the premium. But once they get the coverage, well, the people being evaluated by the insurance company, they will be actually being more risky. So that means there is a higher chance the insurance company has to cover for this person or pay for this person. So one way or the other, the insurer will always be putting into a very, very bad positions in the insurance markets. To tell the difference between the two are very difficult, because the thing is we have to evaluate what we call the ex ante risk and the ex post risk. So the ex ante risk basically is the risk involved before buying the or purchasing the insurance, and the ex post risk is after purchasing the insurance, what's the risk of that individuals. Sometimes it could be the moral hazard causing the problem for the insurers. Sometimes it could be the adverse selections even before the person is being covered. The risk level is already there and they just didn't know it's there. So one way or the other, it's very difficult to actually tease out the two risks separately and trying to measure, well, how much that person has a certain risk level before buying the coverage, and how does it buying the coverage will change the behavior of this persons. In most cases, especially in the PowerPoint lecture, we actually talk about it's more common for people or economists to capture what we call the ex post risk, because, well, obviously those can be measured after the person get into the troubles and then find out that they have the coverage, and then they can easily measure how many times this person will get into accidents, how many times this guy will have to make use of the treatments, and so on after the coverage. But the ex ante risk, it's relatively difficult to measure. Well, there is an issue to separate the two effects, but that's not the focus of this chapter. To be honest, well, the focus of this chapter is to talk about adverse selections. So let's use one of the examples here to illustrate the problems. Let's suppose you are being a consultant of a school. So this school has two groups of employees. It's being hired, which is the financial officers and also the programming engineer. So this two group of people, basically in the year of 2000, they are offered by the school with a very, very generous health insurance coverage. So in the year of 2000, this two group of people don't have to pay any money upfront. So that means the premium for this insurance is $0. So obviously, anyone who are smart enough to figure out it's a free money on the table, right? So you don't have to pay anything, but then you still get the coverage about anything that could possibly happen on your health. So the data actually spit out. In the year of 2000s, well, if we actually did the surveys asking, well, who got the insurance cover. So both groups, everyone's in those groups, actually say yes. And the average expenditures on healthcare or health-related expenditures for the financial officer is $3,000 in the year of 2000s. And also the programming engineer, it's $4,000 on average. So in this case, the financial officer seems to be healthier comparing to the programming engineer, even with the coverage. But in order to figure out whether there is an adverse selection problem or maybe a moral hazard problem, obviously we need a second set of data in order to evaluate. So in the second year, 2001, basically the school took out all the benefits for the employees. So now, instead of paying $0 of the premiums, the school actually asked all the employees, well, now if you want to get this health insurance coverage, well, you will have to pay $4,000. So paying $4,000, of course, it's a huge increase of the payments upfront, because now instead of paying $0, $4,000, it's a lot of money they have to pay in premium. So we actually see the two groups actually behave differently. The people who are in the financial officers category, they basically just say, well, you know what, it's not going to worth my money to pay that $4,000, so I'm going to quit. And for the people who in the programming engineer category, well, they actually stayed. Well, by looking at this table, well, how are we going to tell whether the moral hazard problem engaged or the adverse selection problem engaged? So first of all, if we are going to look at the financial officers and they have this behavior change from yes to no, and this obviously kind of gives us some signal. So think about the premium. If they have to pay $4,000 upfront, and the true average expenditure is only $3,000, obviously they are not going to actually buy this insurance even in year one, because it's not actually worth the money. But what's more concretely evidence to prove a moral hazard happened is when they actually drop the coverage, when they're not insured now, they actually use less of the insurance services or the health services. So the health expenditure actually decreased dramatically from one year to another year. So this change of the behavior after dropping the insurance coverage obviously illustrates people are taking advantage of the insurer in year one. So the moral hazard actually being illustrated in this case. And of course, in this example, we are assuming people's health does not improve dramatically from one year to another year, which is logical to assume because, well, instead of paying $3,000 on average, everyone does, well, it's dropped to $1,000 on average. Obviously, it has to be true that that person or everyone working in this category, they have to have a very, very good health improvements, which it's not very, very logical to assume that could happen in 1 year. So that illustrates the moral hazards. How about the adverse selections? Because we talk about the adverse selections and the moral hazard actually comes together. So we are going to try to think about the relationship between this 1 year first. So let's suppose we look at this year of 2000s. So the financial officer seems to be less healthier comparing to, or more healthier comparing to program engineer because they spend less on health services comparing to the programming engineer. Well, the second year, the premium price increased dramatically to $4,000. Still, they stick with the plans. They think that it's worth it. Even though the average expenditure doesn't actually change much. However, this information here kind of illustrates a perfect example of adverse selections. So this group of people, the programming engineer, they are purchasing the insurance coverage in year 2, even though they have to pay this high premiums price upfront, they still want to get it because the only reason is they know it, they are already sick, or they basically usually pay a huge amounts of money to improve their health. So because they're sicker, that's why they're buying the health insurance. So this is basically an example to illustrate adverse selections. So in this example, it clearly shows you how we actually figure out the problem of moral hazard and adverse selection in a very, very daily situations. Of course, not only it help explains the moral hazard and adverse selections problem, but it also illustrates, again, in this chapter, we actually bring up the problems of positive risk coverage relationship. So remember, the higher the risk, people will buy more of insurance because of these two elements here. Right? So when people buy more insurance and they know it, they are going to get covered by whatever expense they have to later get involved, well, they will be a little bit more riskier. So higher coverage leads to higher risk. So that's what explained by the moral hazards. So the positive relationship between risk and coverage can be explained by moral hazard. But not only just that, the positive relationship can also be explained by the adverse selections because, well, if you have a higher risk, well, you will determine, because you have this bias in your head, you will determine to buy more of a coverage in order to cover those uncertainties and very, very high likely potential risk from your health. So, moral hazards and adverse selections basically both explains the positive risk coverage correlations. The problem is, again, go back to the original case here. Well, how can we tell whether this is an issue created by either moral hazards or adverse selections? Is it possible to actually miss one of them and not seeing the results here? Or maybe have the evidence of the positive correlations between risk and coverage? Well, it's a very complex and complicated question to ask because the fact that we are having a very tough time to define or maybe to actually illustrate the ex-ante risk and ex-post risk. So that's one problem to solve. However, there is another problem is, even though if the market does not have adverse selections, well, still it could be powerful enough to have a moral hazard problems causing this behavior here, or the positive risk coverage correlations. So it's the same, if the market has no moral hazard, still it could be the case where the adverse selection causing the problem of this positive risk coverage correlations. So either of these elements can actually create a positive risk adverse or risk coverage correlations on its own. So that's why it's very, very difficult to tell which of this actually causing the behavior change, or maybe the preset risk, higher risk of the markets in the insurance coverage. So this is one very quick example that illustrates the problem of adverse selections and moral hazards. We have talked about the solutions to adverse selections in the PowerPoint slides and also the textbooks. So I strongly recommend you to take a look at the PowerPoints and also read the textbooks. So we came down to this chapter 10, which is about 1/3 of the way in the semester. So I would strongly recommend you to either start on writing your project or work on the project with your teammates. Remember, this is a summer class that helps people to understand more of the health insurance, healthcare markets, and also health services, health issues in the United States. We actually need students to read a lot and engage a lot to the class in order to pick up those new topics that you have never heard about. So to sum it up, I think from now on you should be aware that if you are not getting a good grade in the class yet, well, you should be working harder, or maybe seek help from the discussion forum so that your classmates or maybe me can help you out on certain topics or maybe certain questions. So I will see you next time.